Okay, so here we are. You've got briefly, this is what IPCC means. It's a United Nations body. It was formed from a meteorological science panel and one or two other science panels, so it comes under the United Nations like a lot of things. 6 times now they've gone through a process of doing scientific research, coming together, bringing their findings into one, reconciling them, assigning how confident they are in each finding, and putting out reports. So AR6, here we are. It's been a long time since the last one. So this is a quite significant moment. And that's why I wanted to give a brief report on it. So the synthesis report wasn't actually new information. It sums up 3 big fat working group reports and 3 special reports. So I'll go through what these were. If I can, yes, I can. The working group 1 looks at the physical science basis of the climate system and climate change. And there are so many scientists working on this and so many techniques and satellites and so on that it's very unwise to challenge on any great scale the overall findings. But they address themselves to audiences such as in the USA who deny that man-made climate change is taking place, and they go into huge detail on what's happening, why and how it happens, and the consequences. The second working group is about adaptation and vulnerability. I've got a little window in the way there, sorry. It looks at the impacts, how we can adapt, vulnerabilities and so on. Pardon me for that little pop-up that shouldn't be there. The third one, mitigation, of course, means making something less. And the crucial thing is, can we make climate change less? Can we slow it down? Can we keep it under control? Can we ultimately bring it to a halt? And the climate change clearly is overall heating of the planet's atmosphere and the oceans, even more at the polar regions, and acidification of the oceans, rising sea levels, and all those other catastrophic consequences, which are not going to happen. They're already happening. Okay, the third report was, oh no, sorry, that was the third report. The 3 special reports, one is a focus on the impact of global warming of 1.5 centigrade because above the olden days, because I think the panel have come to the conclusion that that really is the upper limit of anything reasonable. We're heading that way. We must strive, they say, to keep 1.5 alive. We already, with 1.2 above historic levels, have catastrophic extreme weather events and changes to the climate, changes to sea level all around the world. So that was a special focus report, and that was in the last year or two. This is the 4 slides from the second one, which is the special report on climate change and land. I've taken these from the launch presentation, August 2019. And here you can see what they're saying. Land is precious and finite. Land is interesting because we can use it to solve some of the problem. We can also use it to cause some of the problems. Climate change is causing huge problems, drought, deserts, and so on. But land use can help. For instance, forests can absorb carbon dioxide, and we can resolve a lot of issues to do with food production and many other things. So that was the second. And the third special report, the ocean and the cryosphere. Cryo means extreme cold. So the cryosphere means the icy part of the world. The poles, which are changing in unprecedentedly rapid ways. So that was, and you see the table of contents of the chapters of that report. All there, ipcc.org. Plenty to read if you're bored and with reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, now what do we see what does this summary, the synthesis, contain? They have very high quality graphics which are packed with information. So take a look at this right-hand half of this. Now those 5 bands represent possible future scenarios. On the left half, it's what's happened to the global climate overall, coming up to the year 2020. Those 5 bands on the right are what will happen if, and then they have what they call scenarios, pessimistic at the top, optimistic at the bottom, if all the governments and all the businesses in the world do immediately do their utmost to reduce and halt greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But I love the graphics underneath that, because if you were born a couple of years ago, there you are, 70 years old in 2090, your feet in the optimistic scenario will be at least as warm as they are now, but your head will be intolerably hot in many parts of the world, such as the entire Mediterranean area. There'll be so many days when it's too hot for humans to stay alive that it'll be effectively uninhabitable. Born in 1980, some of us here, 70 years old in 2050, you could already be experiencing extremes of heat. And of course, your children and grandchildren will be facing a very dire or uncertain future. Here are some of us born in 1950s, baby boomers, 70 years old in 2020. Okay, it's already hotter than it's been. Last summer in the UK, hotter than it's ever been, I think. All right, I want you to take a close look at the bar charts there. And because the captions for each of those pairs of bars represent AR5, the 2014 predictions, and AR6, the subsequent and recent predictions. And you might see little diagonal lines. You'll see that the purple, the very high risk or impact color, comes much further down the bar in the current science consensus than it did. So extreme weather events, the second from the left set of bars, they didn't really think there were anything above high risk of extreme weather events, even at 5 degrees Celsius above historic averages. But they now feel that extreme weather events, and of course it's happening now, are going to come at us at 2 degrees, 3 degrees above historic temperatures. That's dramatic. Distribution of the impacts will be more widespread. Moving to the second to the right, global aggregate impacts, the new scientific consensus is that those will be much, much greater than they thought back in 2014. And the same applies to massive catastrophic events. That's the last bar. On the left, by the way, you get the difference between the high future scenario and the low future scenario, and various statistical bands like level of uncertainty. I'll just go to the last one of these, the second to last one. Look at this, what we need to do with greenhouse gases. And one of the sad things about going to COPs and reading about this every year is that for all these wonderful international conferences, greenhouse gas emissions have kept rising regardless. And this is where we are at 2020, when the material for this synthesis was crystallized. You see that we need to make steep drops in greenhouse gas emissions. The blue strip overlaps with the green strip in this top graph and in the others. The blue one is how to limit global warming to overall average of 1.5 Celsius above historic. Green one, if we limit it to 2 degrees. Up there in the pink and red zones, you see a little bar called nationally determined contributions. Those are the promises governments have made and aren't keeping. And the red section is what will happen if we go on as we are with governments and corporations. This is how they're walking the walk, not how they're talking the talk. Below is the same for carbon dioxide separately, and below that is the same for methane, which comes from the fossil fuel industry and from rice farming and livestock around the world. So those emissions also have to halt immediately. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, methane has a special role because it's a vicious greenhouse gas. It's very short-lived. So if we can make cuts in methane in the immediate future, it's technically possible to start cooling the planet's atmosphere in this decade, which would give us respite for the tricky problem of weaning the world's energy systems off of fossil fuels. We should do both to our utmost ability. And then I like this one. This is the final one I'm going to show you from the report. We're looking, as you go from left to right in this wiggly chart, the present world is the big black line. Going down to the lower part is the worst scenarios, and going up to the higher part is the better scenarios. So these strokes of lightning you see around the chart are opportunities or decision points, shocks that disrupt development. And depending how we respond to those shocks, if we respond poorly, we make our way down the chart. It's like snakes and ladders without the ladders. If we respond well and take all the opportunities, we can go up the chart and try and limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's a complex diagram. I'm afraid there's a lot to read on it, and I'm going to move on, but we will be able to put this presentation onto our Welsh Climate Alliance website. So I jumped forward and jumped back. Well, my take on this is that climate campaigning has changed. It was all about net zero and reaching it by 2030, reaching it notionally by 2050, Wiltshire Council and everyone. And if we can't quite do that, then we do our best. We're now in a situation where catastrophic impacts are already happening around the world. They're already happening in Europe and the UK. And what we do in Wiltshire and in communities like us across the world in reducing our emissions or not reducing our emissions and switching to zero carbon forms of energy or not, taken together with communities across the world and particularly the global north, we have the fate of the future of humanity and the planet in our hands. But it's got more urgent than at AR5 level. We now are reaching so close to various tipping points, which means things that happen like melting ice or methane bubbling up from the tundra that will bring runaway global warming, that we're in a decade of urgent short-term measures. And so things are worse. The measures we need to do now are focusing on the urgent and short-term ones. And my third personal take on this is that climate and climate action is beginning to overshadow all other environmental campaigning. Biodiversity is not sustainable unless we tame global warming. What's the point of having cleaner rivers if global warming will cause far more catastrophic impacts? All kinds of other things are starting to be overshadowed by the urgency of getting global warming under control. So it's become a big cuckoo in the nest. That makes us all very anxious. I decided not to show you lots of headlines saying how this report had pulled its punches, saying how the fossil fuel industry and the South American meat and feed industry had nobbled the report to reduce its impact and muddle and obfuscate its conclusions, because that just made me so worried. I didn't want to worry you guys too much. So I'll just skip to one last thing. A lot of us experience this worry, this anxiety, this reaction. So I thought I'd just say we shouldn't ignore our own feelings of fear, worry, depression, despair. And there are plenty of resources available to us to get help for our well-being, our psychological well-being, to talk to other people, to offload our anxiety and our fears, to explore what we can do or whether we feel we can do anything. And I've just given you a selection of those resources, and on the bottom right it says, do we want a Wiltshire Climate Alliance support group? I'm going to stop sharing there if I know how. Or can someone stop me sharing? I'm screen sharing, stop share there. Absolutely spontaneously, is there anyone here who would be interested in some kind of climate anxiety support group? Wouldn't necessarily be under Wiltshire Climate Alliance. I would say that I would like that from time to time. And is there anyone
cover that in the breakouts, do you think? And
yeah, that's a good idea. How am I doing for time? Shall I stop now? I think I will.
do you want to take a couple of questions now, Andrew, or shall I go on and then we'll move into breakouts?
Happy to take a question. Margaret.
Muting. Hi, I've unmuted now. It's not really a question, it's a comment. In Devizes, we've got a climate cafe that meets every Thursday morning. And basically we just sit around and talk about what people can do and what they can't do and what we ought to do and what we ought not to do. But we also did a mass lobby last Friday on Danny Kruger to talk about warm this winter. And warm this winter is about insulation, and insulation is about saving energy, and saving energy is about climate change. So we're moving in the right direction, I think.
And there's a headline on Danny Kruger in the news. I'm going to hustle us along in Wiltshire Times. Yeah, we'll be able to see about that. Margaret, I'm sorry to rudely interrupt you.
It's okay, no problem.
We'll have the breakouts as well. Graham.
Yeah, just very quickly, since the IPCC report came out, one of the things I've been observing quite a lot on social media and from people who routinely report on the climate crisis is what you'd almost describe as climate doomism now. It's all too late, yeah, almost to the point of why should we bother? And I think one of the things that we should always be mindful of in WCA is the need to remain realistic, but also optimistic in the sense of helping to move people forwards.
Thank you. One of the key messages of the report and the United Nations Secretary General's introduction is that every increment of global warming, however small, that we can prevent through action at every level is good. It's like when they're appealing for donations to charity. Every little helps, any amount, however small, helps and makes a difference. Doomism, it's too late, let's walk away. That's not appropriate. That's not the message coming from IPCC. Judy.
I wish I did about unmuting, sorry. Hi. I'd just like to remind people that the single most significant cause of emissions is the easiest one to address. There is a solution. There's a policy called climate, we call it climate income now. It's also called carbon fee and dividend. It's the policy that puts a rising price on fossil fuels and gives the money back to people. If it was studies in, it's been enacted in Canada, it's being considerably enacted in Switzerland and Austria. And studies have shown that if it were enacted immediately, it would cut emissions by 50% by 2030. It would grow jobs, protect the poorest, promote every kind of green behavior. I mean, it would do a lot of that behavior change, which we keep trying to do without the support of the price system. And if anybody wants to find out more about it, we're having a special, in Marlborough, we're having a special campaigning group, a three-month campaign starting on the 19th of this month.
Thank you, Judy. And could you put a link in the chat? I think that's a fantastic organization. Is it called Was Climate Coalition, now Climate Income?
It was carbon fee and dividend.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
okay, I'll put a link in the chat.
that's
Thank you.
brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Judy. Val.
I believe Nigel said that he was, ooh, I've gone, part of Mind. Perhaps Nigel could help us with the sort of the climate anxiety. Is that right, Nigel?
Yes, you put me on the spot there. I just happened to mention that, you know, if there was perhaps a need for some specialist input on mental health related issues. I am a trustee for Wiltshire Mind, which is not the only mental health charity active. I'm aware of that, but we are the county's mental health charity, and there is a significant amount of expertise floating around there. So I think if you were looking to create perhaps a little momentum and a little encouragement, I may be able to sequester some help from our specialists there and provide some input. But I think it would need to be a separate event from something like this.
Mm.
That's great. Thanks, Nigel. And Mind is a great organization I know firsthand. And if you could contact us, for instance, there's contact at Wiltshire Climate Alliance, and that will be steered through to the right folks.
Yeah.
We're completely out of control of the time. I really want to call on Adam.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. So first point, obviously we're Wiltshire Climate Alliance. Our main focus is on what's happening in Wiltshire and Wiltshire Council. So why are we talking about international or national policy? Well, I think it's important to keep reminding ourselves of that context. And in particular, the national policy is important because whenever we engage with Wiltshire Council, particularly with Richard Kluwer, he always says, I'd love to do more, but national policy is getting in the way. So in that context, I want to just very briefly talk about the Powering Up Britain announcements that came out last week. So they came out after all that IPCC stuff, and also after Chris Skidmore produced his net zero review in January, and after the Climate Change Committee has been going on and on for a long time about how the government's current policies are way behind where they need to be in terms of delivery against the statutory legal carbon budgets that the government is legally committed to. And you're probably aware there have also been legal challenges against those that are running at the moment to say the policy is not delivering against those legal targets. So you think against all that context, we'd be getting a really sort of radical, well-informed policy. But unfortunately, that's not what we've got. So the Powering Up Britain, which I'm sure you will have read it, so I'm not going to go through every single detail of it, but just very briefly, sort of the main headlines were £20 billion invested in carbon capture and storage over the next 20 years. So that's in an essentially unproven and very expensive technology, but not to capture and reduce emissions that are already out there. That's to offset emissions from new carbon, new oil fields, new burning of fossil fuels. So that's not actually going to make any net reduction in our emissions. It's just going to mean we're slightly less carbon intensive in our future emissions. There was a big thing about hydrogen, which again is very unproven at scale and unproven to be cost effective. Nuclear, 25% of our energy coming from nuclear by 2050. You can argue about that, whether that's a good thing or not. But the crucial point about that is virtually nothing coming on stream in the next 10 years and very little coming on stream in the next 20 years. So even if you think nuclear is a good thing, it's absolutely not going to reverse these trends anytime soon, given the urgency that Andrew's just expressed. And the same old targets about offshore wind, 50 gigawatts by 2030, which we probably do have a chance of delivering, and 5 times increase in solar by 2035. Which we may do if the NIMBYs don't sort of get in the way of that. And there was some stuff about more EVs and a bit more funding for EV charging infrastructure and stuff like that. and another £1 billion for the Great British Insulation Scheme. Well, we've all seen the previous insulation schemes. There was a £5 billion insulation scheme that I think George Osborne had, which delivered virtually nothing. So the track record of these retrofit insulation schemes is very poor, and actually £1 billion is a tiny drop in the ocean of what's actually needed. What's more important and more interesting is what wasn't mentioned in that. So there was nothing about carbon taxation, as Judy just mentioned, which, as you know, I totally agree, is a really, really powerful lever. There was nothing about new build, building of houses energy efficiently. There was nothing about planning policy, even though all those things were covered in huge detail in Chris Skidmore's net zero report. And Chris Skidmore is, a influential Tory MP. There was nothing about farming and land use and methane emissions. They have said that they're going to produce a land use strategy in June, so maybe that's coming, but there was nothing about it in there. There was nothing about onshore wind. Those words were not mentioned anywhere. And this was an energy security strategy, powering up Britain, but just not mentioned at all. In parallel with this, they're also talking about licensing this new Rosebank oil field, which will produce 500 million barrels, which some analysts are saying that alone will exceed our carbon budget post 2028. All other emissions will have to be well less than zero for us to stay within our budget, just because that field is open. So basically, we can't look to this government for policies that are actually going to get us out of this problem. And clearly that has a knock-on into what happens in Wiltshire, and it also has a knock-on in what happens internationally. So I'll leave it there. I don't think not much point in debating the merits of this government. They're not going to change. I think there are other things that we need to be thinking about, perhaps which we can pick up in the breakout later. So that's all I was going to say on that. So should we move into breakouts?
Yes, let's do that. I don't think we managed to get.
Yes, I have to apologise for being so negative. I mean, I know,
Well, if we were going to have a question, it would be, why do you think the government's doing this and not doing that? But I think that we needn't dwell on that. And thank you, Kate, for your very open and vulnerable comment in the chat. There are two strands in the climate anxiety support scene, and one is alleviate your anxiety by taking effective action, and the other is just look after yourselves, get personal support. Don't be afraid to chill out, don't be afraid to back out of things, because unless you look after yourself, you can't look after the planet. So we, in the breakouts, did we in the steering group decide to have a very intricate system of having topics that we want people to address? And
no, we decided we'd have two sets of breakouts instead. So this one is about the IPCC report and what the government's doing and what we want to do to talk to our MPs, our councillors and area boards, and our communities, local communities. And the other one will be about the.
So two breakouts, and I'm sorry, I've been burning the midnight oil doing this brief presentation and reading everything background. So we want to have breakouts on our reaction to the to where we are with the IPCC report, and the need for urgent action at every level this decade, and the problem that that action needs to be taken at every level: personal, local, county, national. But I just want to repeat that I think that we in Wiltshire and communities across the world like us have responsibility. If we can take any form of effective action, we should consider ourselves responsible for the planet. That's just a personal take. Are you sorting out the breakout, Bill, first?
Sorry, yeah, it's only a quick one. I think from trying to be positive, I think the question we were asking is, how do we as individual groups and Wiltshire Climate Alliance take action to respond to these reports? So trying to think of positive ways of dealing with it is what we want to do in the breakouts. It's really important we get around the positive messaging as well as everything else. We've got to deal with this in as positive a way as possible. So come out of the breakouts with some brief thoughts on what we could do in those levels, individuals, groups, WCA. Probably only get one of those done, but let's have some of it.
Back, everyone's back. Great. We were breakout room 4, and we want to some extent bring things back to our timetable. We had Max, Claire, and myself, Adam and Keith from the steering group. So can I ask if we can hear a report back from each breakout, but with the most important point, please? The outstanding point. Who knows whether they were in breakout room 1?
I think we talked a lot about the need to take this up a notch, and Graham was talking about the kind of impact we could have through joining the big one on the 21st of April, which we're going to talk about shortly anyway, but and also further action like that. So Graham, would you like to explain a bit about how you're going to be picketing? Because this is a big question for us as a WCA membership. In the XR has changed its tactics. XR is trying to team up with 73 other organisations around the UK to flag that this is mission critical stuff now for the government to tackle. And
we are covering the big one further down the agenda.
Yeah, indeed. I wouldn't want to steal any of Bill's.
Then.
I wouldn't want to steal any of Bill's thunder.
So
we'll maybe get to it when we get to it, Julie.
But just to finish from our group, that was tempered with the need, as Julian quite rightly said, to combine that with direct action locally at our local governors, the council, and trying to influence our local MPs as well, and do something through the membership like that. So yeah.
And I'm just going to repeat back to you the key point that you started with, which is that you felt there was a need to scale things up, action and everything. Okay, yeah. Thanks. Group tours, please. There's Kate.
Would anybody else like to feed back, or would you like me to do it?
I don't mind feeding back, Kate.
Oh, fantastic, Val. Thank you.
Right. Well, we talked about all the things that we did personally. And one of the things we said was to go to the big one. And then we talked about all sorts of ways of heating our homes. But the thing that came out of it that we thought was a good idea was to actually have thermal imaging cameras and go round our local vicinities so people knew about the energy losses in their own homes and could then think about something, how to do it. And also Kate was saying about open houses, so people have got air source and ground source, can actually be shown how they work and talk through it. Anything else, Kate?
So that was get the thermal imaging camera out and get it known to everybody and start using it in earnest. Yes, and Bradford and Avon Climate Friendly Group has a thermal imaging camera, and if anyone wants a paid cheese survey, the official one, they can get surveys in at least West Wiltshire.
Okay.
Group
3. Yeah, we came up with 2 things really. One from Judy, who she'd already mentioned, the fact that they're doing the carbon pricing in Marlborough, and I think we would just encourage everybody to go to that and start to get some idea of what it's all about. We had a talk on it about a year ago, and it sounded really interesting, but it then disappeared. So to bring it back to the fore, I think would be a really good idea. It's then, having gone to it, we've got to work out how we influence others to deliver it. But that was the first thing. Let's look at carbon pricing, and that's good. And the second one was majorly on targeting a minister, particularly on housing, to talk more and persuade more or influence more or lobby or whatever it is, to actually get them to control the way housing is built in terms of emissions and make sure new housing is all zero emissions, and to ensure that house builders are absolutely forced to do that if they won't do it willingly. So there's a big lobbying thing there on central government, and that probably comes back to us knocking on the door on Friday the 21st and saying, what are you doing? But also seriously going in there and trying to get hold of the minister in one way or another. Maybe that starts by writing, which I think is a good idea too. And Jane suggested that we should be writing it to our local press, writing to all the people we can think about locally to get them mobilized to be doing things as well. So there were 3 really good things come out of the meeting.
Bill, could you do me a favor, put them in the chat, because
I will. I've got them written down. I'll try and put them in the chat. If not, I'll get them out later. We should coordinate all those anyway.
people who know me know that my attention sometimes wanders, and it just wandered. So you put them in the chat and we'll get
I'll
on.
deal with it. Yeah, okay.
However, I am aware of what group 4 dealt with, and I would say that oh goodness, one of the big things we came up with was that even though in my presentation I said that the climate overshadows pretty much all other environmental issues, Max reminded us it's important to tackle them as well, not neglect anything, but work on sometimes more than one thing, tackle issues concurrently. You can't just leave the rivers to go to hell because of the climate. We also agreed that we need to communicate and explain things in simple terms to elected representatives. There's far too much information out there. The councillors are asking us for presentations. I think we should be going around the area boards, going around the town and parish councils, giving clear, simple presentations. We also came to the fact that personal stories, talking about your own action and your own feelings, and works of art, like a comic book that's been published, called The Most Important Comic Book on Earth. But artwork by us locally live and by young people are important. And then the other message was focusing on the general election, because this government, is who it is. And there is synergy between communicating with the public and with councillors, and also communicating with election candidates. So those were some of the things we came up with. Okay, and that was the 4th of 4 groups. Any further comments? Stick your hand up, chat, things like that, that we need to do before we move on? Or Julian, can I get you to do the Master of Ceremonies transitioning to the next agenda item, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's 9 o'clock now, so we need to move on to Keith, who's got the business report about. Are you all ready, Keith?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Yeah, I'll share screen.
Are you able to share? Okay.
Host is disabled sharing still. Just
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, you're the one.
Okay.
Add to it. Why aren't you in the list?
I don't know.
There we go. You should be able to share now. Sorry.
Good. Yes, I am now sharing. Hopefully you can see a slide share. There we are. You should all now be able to see a screen with WCA Business Engagement Group on it. Yes, nods on that, and hopefully you can hear me clearly. Thank you. I'm going to talk for the next 20 minutes about the project I've been running in the Business Engagement Group, which is to do a citizen-led research study into answering the question, just how well are Wiltshire businesses tackling the climate crisis? And in that time, I'll briefly cover what we did and why we did it. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at just how big businesses is and why business is an important thing, even though it isn't much talked about by people in the environmental sector. Quick whiz through the main results and then some of the recommendations we put together for change. And then time permitting, we will have a small breakout. And in the breakout, I'd like people to be focusing on the sort of, well, just what the hell can we do to bring about change in business? I think that'd be the main question. So in the last year, I kind of came into this role last year, about February, March time as the business engagement lead. And we really didn't have any idea just what businesses in Wiltshire are really doing in terms of changing the way they run their operations to take account of the impact they have on the climate. So we felt that you couldn't really go and engage with people around Wiltshire unless you had something to say. So we decided it'd be a good idea to try and answer that question and find out what are Wiltshire businesses doing in general, get some sort of a sample survey about the state of managing climate change in businesses operating across the county. That was going to be a serious amount of work. So we recruited some volunteers, people from all over the country popped up to the job description we put out and came onto it. We then spent quite a bit of time thinking, well, how do you do this in a way that makes it valid, quantified and semi-scientific? And so we developed an assessment system that would enable us to score and assess various aspects of people's policy and actions on climate change. And when we got going, we were initially had a list of about 54 companies that had been put forward by members of the WCA as potentially big impact organisations. And we set about analysing the publicly available information from each of those, their website policy, their reported strategy, their accounts at Companies House, which should also include reference to their carbon emissions. And that really took us from sort of May, June through till November, quite a lot of work. We ended up with a hardcore team of about 5 people working away, busy hours over weekends and time in the vans to do the work. And then we, in the back end of last year, we got on with turning all the findings into a report. There's a lot of analysis done, and now we're ready to publish that information. So just to give you a snapshot on sort of how big and important business is, because I don't think people spend much time thinking about it. In the UK as a whole, there are 5.5 million registered organisations who are limited companies. Now, if you discount 4 million of those who are people who are just a home worker who made themselves a limited company, they're not providing any employment. There's still these 1.4 million organisations working away with employees doing stuff to make economic value. And clearly when they do that, they know they always have some carbon impact. But if you counter that with the number of organisations who are currently mandated by UK government to actually do stuff, then there's only 12,000 very large firms that fall within the government's rules about who has to do some carbon monitoring and reporting. It's all the very big firms. So actually only 0.8% of firms in the UK have any duty or regulated duty to report on their CO2 emissions, even though every single one has to do VAT and money and accounts and all that stuff. It is worth saying, however, that that small number, that 0.8% of the big mega firms, so they do represent apparently 39% of total turnover, but it's not a very big coverage. Bring that down to the Wiltshire level to try and get the number of firms operating in Wiltshire. The only bit of data I can find is that there are 13,000 premises registered for business rates. So at some time in the last few years, they've had active businesses doing stuff in those business rate areas. And we know from some work we did last year looking at a bid model of the UK done by for BIS that if you take business and commercial activity in Wiltshire and you allocate the transport to that, then you end up with about 54% of all the direct emissions, the stuff that goes up the stack, is to do with business. So, but of course, in business, you don't just get the direct emissions to do with the actual operating of the factory site and the use of electricity on that site. The big hitter for most businesses is all their scope 3, which is all the supply chain, getting the raw materials out of the ground, getting it converted into a format they can use it, doing something with it to make windows, doors, cars, food, whatever they produce, and then the distribution and logistics and transport, the use of the product. Imagine if all car companies had to count the emissions of the use of their products for the lifetime. So that's much bigger. The conclusion of this little quick snapshot study is that if you can't take business along with you on the journey to low carbon neutral Wiltshire, you haven't got a hope in hell of achieving the targets. This is just a little sketch to remind. I will talk about scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 a little bit. Scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are the direct ones. And as I've said, all the supply chain is scope 3. So what we did is we decided we'd look at these range of headings when we did our scoring. We had 45 questions that we pulled together from a survey of all the different types of certification schemes that we looked at, global ones, local ones, etc. And we split that down into trying to allocate scores to how good is the policy, are there targets and goals set, is the reporting of a good quality that makes it useful, has there been real engagement with stakeholders in the organisation, is there a clear line of governance, and then, probably more importantly, even though you've got targets and goals and policy, have they actually achieved anything significant yet, these firms? And what are they saying about where they've got to? What's the performance that results? And when all that was done, the assessor had the opportunity to give them an overall, bit like your headmaster school report. Overall, I'm giving them this score out of 10 for what they did. And we banded that into 3 levels, red, amber, green, as you can see from the scores on the side. Typically, on each section, we then had a load of drill down questions. So this is the one about the policy, and these are all the different areas we asked people to go into. So we did as much detail as we could and worked pretty hard to get to the nitty gritty points. Didn't just do it on one thing. The types of firms in our 50 that we looked at, in the end, they were mostly large organisations, and we seemed to find that mostly people were looking at manufacturing and logistics type firms. And I think that's because we just asked people to submit company names that they thought might be big potential impactors. So you'd look to the big factory on the side of your town with a big stack, or the one with a lot of lorries that you see driving around, and they seem to be the ones that we mostly studied. So it's not a random sample that's a distribution of all the types of business in Wiltshire. It's ones that were put forward. So let's now quickly get into the results. The full report is available to download here now. There's 40 pages, some detail in the middle. You can just look at the executive summary and the main pictures and read our recommendations if you don't want to read 40 pages, perhaps not this evening. This is our overall big graph that I quite like this one. It's an attempt to show the headline results on one graph. What this shows is, along the bottom is the possible score you could get, up to 10. Up the side, frequency, the number of firms that got that score. So 9 of the companies we looked at scored absolutely 0, nada, nil. Basically, once you'd search for the word environmental, climate, sustainability, anything at all in their website or their published information, if those words are not being mentioned, you're looking at a firm that's saying nothing about what they do. And you have to assume that they're probably not doing much. All the way through, we could only operate on what companies say they are doing. We couldn't get inside and see what they were actually doing. And so then you see a large number of firms in our red, well below okay level, quite a few in the middle yellow stage, and not that many, only 9 in our sort of green, looks pretty good band, no firms scoring 9 or 10 at all. So I think the phrase in the school report, could do better, is probably being quite fair. We might as well just go straight. I haven't got time to go into detail about whether people's policy were better than their targets or whether their reporting standards were better than others. Let's just try and pick out some of the main threads. This table, which goes over several slides, ranks all those 49 firms from the top of the league down to the bottom. And this is the top 9 who scored in our green band of traffic light colouring system. It's pretty okay. You can see that they're all mostly large, more than 250 plus employees, and therefore it's pretty fair to assume that our large ones were the ones who have to do some carbon reporting. The 2 marked around in red are smaller companies, Good Energy, a relatively local sustainable power supply business, and Hobbs House Bakery, nice homely natural bread suppliers. And that's interesting because they aren't actually regulated to have to do anything. They've chosen to do some good quality carbon reporting and put that out there about their business because it fits with the culture and ethos of what they do. So they're the only 2 non-large companies in the top firms. This is the whole next down, probably just scan your eyes down all the names on the left. If anyone's interested in finding out more, we do have a detailed breakdown for each firm. And you can see that still mostly the large companies are in our sort of mid-range section. Lower range score, getting into the bottom half of the league table now. Still quite a lot of large companies and smaller firms creeping in. And to, you know, a big firm like Dyson only scoring 2 is not that impressive, really. And then down at the lower end, all these firms down in our ones and nils area. So those are the headline results. There's a lot more detail in the report, but I'll just pull out, having spent a long time looking at the data and thinking about what we could really observe. Here's some blindingly obvious facts and findings that we got. And one would perhaps assume that you could extrapolate this to the UK. Generally, in the UK, certainly in Wiltshire, the firms we looked at, only the large firms are the ones who are doing the most. And that's because they have to. We also found that if you find a strong governance policy, it's clear who's in charge, the policy is well written, the targets are clearly stated. That tends to follow through as a trail of good management saying that they will deliver good results. As you probably picked up from the league table, as a broad generalisation, small and micro-sized firms, less than 50 staff, nearly all have nil policy and aren't doing very much. So there's a huge gap there. The Scope 3 emissions, which I touched on earlier, under the UK regulated rules, firms don't have to report their Scope 3, only their direct Scope 1 and 2. But the really enlightened firms should be able to do it. It's not really difficult, but generally we found that even the bigger firms were ignoring a lot of their Scope 3 impacts. And those that had looked at their Scope 3 emission measuring looked at the easy to measure things like how much of a material they're buying, because they already record that, or how much our transport's costing us, or are our staff using public transport to come into work. Very few were looking at things like what is the impact of all these products we've sold once they get used out there in the marketplace? What happens to the products at end of life? What is the downstream impacts that result from the commercial products we've sold? So that was pretty poor. We had a good go as we could at working out whether companies were actually what we called on track. If there was evidence that said they were on track to get to where they said they were going to be by 2030 and 2050. And that's pretty difficult because most firms have only been working on this in the sort of started about 2018, 2019, 2020. Those are the most common baseline years from which they start measuring their journey. And within the period we were looking at, we only really got reports up to 2021 in a few cases. You had 2 or 3 years for doing a trend, and those were interrupted by the massive pandemic impacts. So it's really hard to tell now at this early stage whether these firms are on track going forward. And we only found 4 where there was some evidence that they possibly are on track. The other thing we picked up is, as you might expect, if you had this job in a big company, you do the easy things first. So you switch your power to a renewable power supplier. If you've got a big factory, you might put some solar panels on the roof. You probably switch all the lighting in the factory over to LED. You tell all the managers who've got a company car they're going to have an electric car soon, by 2025. And those are pretty common threads. Pretty easy to do. And nearly all of those lead into a demonstrable, pretty rapid payback thing. But what worried me here is that for many organizations, the really big core of their impact is the main thing they do. So, you know, we were surprised to see an organization like Tarmac and Wincanton at the top of our league table, because based on what they say they're doing really well. But they hadn't really addressed their fundamental stuff. If you put bitumen on roads and sell cement to make things, and that's 85–90% of what you do, until there's a solution for bitumen and cement, there's not a great deal you can change in your business other than the things I mentioned, the easy wins. If you make plastic pipes from oil-based plastic using energy and heat to shape those pipes, if that's your core thing, which one of the firms does, once you've done the easy wins, the really hard hitters are tackling your fundamental stuff that you do. And I didn't see a massive amount of evidence of that happening. A company like Nestle that we got looking at, because Cereal Partners in Melksham are part of Nestle, they spent ages with an amazing amount of money saying how wonderful their new regenerative treatment of people growing cocoa beans and palm oil is going to be, and they're going to manage those areas so that they're fully regenerative, and it's going to be lovely. People are going to have a lovely lifestyle. We'll look after them. So you can eat your chocolate and your Easter eggs knowing that our supply chain is living a nicer life. But they still buy 65 million tons of milk a year. And until they challenge that, I can't see they're really going to have a big impact. Anyway, we shall crack on. There's a bit of evidence of green hushing, we think. Firms who are not saying what they're actually doing, they're just maintaining radio silence because they're worried about perhaps saying we're going to get to X by this time, and then they never get there. So they just keep quiet. Clearly, consumer-facing brands, we found, are the ones who are most likely to make a big show of doing a good job on dealing with the climate in a way that their customers can understand. And there's a massive, massive gap in the small and medium-sized enterprises sector. Just a quick example of what good looks like. This was one of our top firms. A nice simple table. What we're going to do by these years, scope 1 and scope 1 and 2 separate from scope 3. Simple information. That's pretty good stuff. Quite rare. This is that stuff about trending I talked at. This is for Wincanton. Look at their 3 years. Low, low, and then a shooting up. So revenue shot up, but they're planning to go downhill. Whereas when they do an intensity measurement, which is the CO2 per million of revenue, you might argue that this little tiny short trend line, fingers crossed, points towards this point down here. But it's really early days yet to do trending. Main recommendations then, I'll crack on. There's more than these are some of the main ones. Unless the government extends the statutory needs to report on carbon to include a lot more firms, there's always going to be a huge gap here. People aren't going to do this unless they're mandated to do it. You have to include the scope 3 emissions to do a proper measurement, and they're not in the reporting requirement at the moment. So you get scope 3 in there. And even if you do the reporting really well, it seems to me it needs to come with a a clear statement and a plan about how the firm's then going to reach net zero. Otherwise, they just report a lot of emissions for the next 10 years. At the Wiltshire level, really the council probably, I think their most powerful lever would be to really toughen up the money they spend of ours on buying services and goods so that they only buy sustainable provided services and goods. You know, electric coaches maybe, who knows? And I think they could perhaps use the planning controls to insist that when we do build new commercial infrastructure, like a massive great distribution warehouse up near the M4, it should be completely covered in solar panels and have all the very best in, which clearly is not happening at the moment. Business managers, all those in the small to medium size area, you've really got to get off base one and start doing some proper carbon management and reporting. And perhaps an incentive would be to understand more about the advantages of selling your products better if you could demonstrate you were running a low carbon business. And if you're doing nothing at all, you're a really small firm, I just recommend you've really got to start. And the place we found that was absolutely the best place to go for small businesses was called Zero Carbon Business. Fantastic government funded website, really, really good. So we've done all the stuff in phase one pretty much now. Later this month, we're going to try and run a webinar on the 26th of April to get more in the middle of a day on a Wednesday, I think, to try and get more business people and some of the organisations around the county involved who should be, Business West and SWEP and people at the council who are interested in business. And then the focus for the rest of the year will be on how do we take the lessons we've learned from this work and use that to actually generate some action for change. Any questions? We're probably going to have a quick breakout. I could take a couple of questions if you like, or we could break out. I'll stop talking.
I'm going to suggest that we don't have a breakout, but have questions now, because it's unfair to people to have a meeting that's much too long. I really have so many questions, but I would like you to tell us whether you could hold a meeting inviting everyone in who's here or in Wiltshire Climate Alliance to focus on this at more length and remind us the recommendations and so that people can agree a way forward. I think you've done fantastic with your team. I think what you'd might like now is for more people in Wiltshire Climate Alliance to opt in to the next steps. So Julie's got a question or a comment.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, and thanks a lot, Keith. I wanted to understand how many people here tonight, and I don't know if it's possible, Julie, and for you to see everyone. Could you just put your hand up if you're actually running a business at the moment yourself? Is there anyone here? Kate, yeah, okay.
Sort of for a future business.
It's just me. It's all online now. I don't travel around.
Oh, okay. I can't see some of you, so if you can put your thumbs up in the chat or something, that would be really helpful, because we will be asking, we're running a poll on this anyway in the membership, but I think so I can't really, other than one of us or two of us, so a few of us. Okay, not many. All right, thanks. That was my question.
Any more questions? Claire, you've got a hand up. Muted.
Beg your pardon. Yeah, I was just wondering whether you were thinking about a direction of travel where I noticed, for example, James Hay, which is very local to me here, where you were thinking there was any mileage in actually making connections between somebody like me and James Hay, that is a business I know well and is connected in lots of ways. Do you think that would be something that you could go forward with in terms of either congratulating that business or individuals writing to the business saying, why aren't you doing more? Do you think that's a good idea? What do you think?
I quite like the idea of trying to engage with businesses directly, but I think there's a couple of points that have arisen, because we did, with about 3 or 4 firms, get involved in some debate, and it's quite hard to get in a position of them being a willing receptor of what you say to them, particularly if you're turning up as a sort of with a fairly critical report on what they've done. Some people are willing to hear it, but they're more than likely the person in the organisation who's already got nominated responsibility for delivering their environmental and sustainability plans. So there's almost an inbuilt goal for them to keep it quiet. Oh, blimey, I better do better. But, you know, it can work. The other issue is, if you're not careful, you get sucked into this sort of role of being a free consultant to help them out. So at the moment, the reason I'm sort of asking people for their views is to try and work out what's going to be the most effective thing to do going forward. You know, there's 50 organisations there. So far, we only really managed to strike up any sort of meaningful discussion with about 3 or 4 of them. And then they're probably thinking, all right, these Wiltshire Climate Alliance people have done a piece of work, but I'm doing what I'm told to do by government. I'm meeting my minimum statutory requirement. I want to get on with selling pipes and laying roads and delivering Easter eggs. You know, that's the business that people want to do.
Thanks.
It's worth a go, I think, but it's will it be effective is the question I'm left with.
Good.
Can I say something? Sorry.
Jez has got his hand up, and then Vale.
Yeah, thanks. Brilliant, Keith. Well done. Great work. Excellent. I don't know if I sent you a Slack message earlier today. Something came across my desk. It says it's from Wiltshire Council. A free business energy survey with detailed recommendations is available to any small and medium-sized enterprise through their Target 2030 campaign. Have you heard of that? And do you think it'd do any good?
Yeah, I have heard of the Target 2030 campaign. I think it's listed in, we did as we were going through all this, we did a bit of a report called Useful Resources for Business. And it's kind of a list of all the useful things we found, from online certification schemes to locally available grants and schemes. And the Target 2030 is listed there. So maybe what we should do is make sure that our members are aware of this useful list of references for businesses to look at. Certainly worth it. It's there.
It's okay.
Every time I've dived into any of those grants for free stuff, they seem to have a long list of constraints about where you need to be and what sort of firm you are and what you need to do yourself, so that it quickly cuts it down. But yeah, there's some stuff there, I think.
Okay, thanks, Keith. That's for looking into. Val, thanks for waiting patiently.
That's okay. I just wondered, Keith, you've got a variety of businesses, from the small one, the bakery, and then probably there'd be a medium one somewhere, medium size, and then the large one. So if you picked out the best of those, like the Hobbs Bakery, whatever, and were able to put those out into in the press, if you like, and say, this is what these businesses are doing on these levels, you know, maybe that would be a way of sort of showing people how they could do it in a way.
I do think there's some strength in that, and that I think I'm reaching a conclusion that where actions in the next 9 months could have most benefit might be with the small to medium-sized enterprises in the county, because I even with my super optimism, I find it hard to think of going and knocking on the door of some of the biggest Nestle or BMW car group and saying, would you like to hear about our report? You really need to improve the way you make cars in Wiltshire, because we're not happy with your score. I mean, I think you're going to have no effect. Whereas if you found another bakery as an opportunity, you know, if there's a Calm bakery somewhere and they're not doing anything, they might learn a bit from seeing a competing bakery who's actually used taking a strong position on climate as a way to sell more bread. You know, that might have some logic to it. So I'm kind of favouring trying to get more support from the council if possible, or finding a way of interacting with small and medium-sized businesses. But that makes a really big job. If there's 13,000 premises in Wiltshire, how many of those have got SMEs operating in them, and how the hell do we get the resources to try and interact effectively with those? They're quite big questions.
Can I toss?
Nigel, you want to comment?
Yeah,
Nigel.
I wanted really to toss a pebble in the pond here. As I mentioned in my intro, some many years as an environmental consultant, and gosh, probably 20 years ago now, I took part in a regional project sponsored by government to take into small businesses fundamentally waste management, of which energy conservation is but one part of that. Engagement with small business is incredibly difficult. And even if you do, you find yourself in the challenging position of discussing resources with them and how much value there is to them. And I appreciate there are some idealistic issues in the background here, but fundamentally, if they are running a business, the challenge to them is, if I allocate all these resources to managing climate change, something is going to suffer. And they are trying to find a balance in managing the business, and in many cases doing their best, if not necessarily cataloguing what they're doing. And I would just, one particular comment that I would make about this whole issue of gathering in information, the importance is having valid data, being sure that the figures you're getting are accurate. And when you get into the realms of trying to get accurate, valid scope 3 figures, you are in very murky waters. It can be done if you have big organizations with lots of resources. But I'm afraid if you are, if you take the local transport company, Garbett, they've probably got half a dozen lorries, and they're working their rocks off to keep them on the road and maximize their load carrying capacities. I fear within that organization, finding somebody who's going to sit down and work with them, or work on the calculation of all their emissions, it fundamentally is not going to happen. I think the only way you can get into small businesses, and you may shout rhubarb at me if you like, but the real challenge to them is going in to ask them where they think they're going to be with their business in 10 years' time, because climate change and carbon efficiency is a critical challenge for them. Most importantly, it's a critical challenge for them in regard to their supply chains and whatever resources they're looking for. And I think you have to tackle them not around the numbers issue, but just fundamentally asking them where they see their business in 10 years' time and what they think the significant risks to that business might be if their resources are cut off or if their major supplier goes out of business. These are the sort of things that I fear we've got to be a little bit more critical in the analysis of.
Thank you, Nigel. Great points. We're running a little late. You'd be a key person to come to a high-level Zoom meeting. How we're going to take this forward. Hey, look, you didn't take 2 steps back, Nigel. Therefore, you've taken 1 step forward. I'm going to make one comment, which is I'm singling out Wiltshire College as, for several reasons, it's the worst performing large business. It's not a business, it's in the public sector. So it's got civil society obligations, and their customers are mainly young people. So I'm going to ask Keith more about Wiltshire College, and I would be very keen to take action and work with Wiltshire College. So moving on the agenda then, we want to talk about the big one, and over to Bill.
Muted, Bill.
Yeah, it will be quick. I'll try and make it quick. Yeah, I'd just like to share my screen. I'm just trying to find, there we are. Okay, so the big one, just a quick, and come in if you can help. is all I would say, because it's trying to find information about the detail is quite difficult. So any feed into this would be quite useful. It's a 4-day event taking place in London, and it's running Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, starting on the 21st, with 4 key messages in each day. One is a Unite to Survive, and that day there's going to be workshops and fairs and things around Parliament Square, but also there's going to be a picket outside most of the major government businesses, government departments, sorry, that are around Parliament Square. There are about 10 of them. I've got a map somewhere which I can show you in a minute. So the idea is to get up there when you can, meet whoever you can, and you'll find there are lots of support up there. And the guys who are supporting it will be wearing high vis, and they'll say support or something on the back, and ask them what's happening. If you want, I can't give you any more detail, I'm afraid, but turn up whatever time you like, because they'll be starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. You don't have to get up there for that. And it'll be running all day, so you can join in and or not in terms of picketing the various departments, or you can join in the debates in Parliament Square. It is a friendly atmosphere. It's not going to be confrontational. There'll be no gluing of people's hands to the floor or whatever. So it's a safe place to go, but it's also a good place for 20,000 people to turn up and make their voices heard. I think the number is 24,000 now, but it's that sort of number are saying they're going to come. So please come on the 21st. Choose a day or come every day. If you want to pick one on biodiversity, Saturday's the day. If you want to get your face seen on TV, Sunday is a day, because marathon runs past Parliament Square, and we should be waving banners, flags or whatever at the media as they're going past, so we get some more messaging out there. And then on Monday, there's going to be a petition handed in, or the demands are handed in to Parliament, and then pickets at government departments again. So pick your day, go when you can, please turn up. Everyone's desperate to get some message yet again out to Parliament. And the last time this was done a few years ago, Parliament then declared a climate emergency, but then did nothing about it, didn't make it legislative or anything. So that was to get rid of the people who were outside, I believe, but that's history. So let's make this one a more positive messaging exercise and try and get them to really start listening. Okay, anybody got any comments, support, questions?
I can add a little bit to some of that, Bill, if you'd like.
Thanks, Graham.
Yeah. So the pickets on the Friday and the Monday will be running to cover from when staff start entering departments, from maybe as early as 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. But we have said to the police that we will be clear of government departments. We'll be packing down, pickets by 6 p.m. I think I'm working as part of the organising community on one of those pickets, and we're actually looking on the Friday to consolidate our actions around a period from about 11 in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon, predominantly. And part of the reason for that on the Friday is because there is going to be a convening rally and opening ceremony in Parliament Square at 3 p.m. On the Saturday, the Biodiversity Day, in the morning, there'll be a set of workshops, outreach events, speeches, and so on. And then starting at 1 p.m., there will be a mass rally with speeches, followed by a march, followed by other speeches. And then at 3 p.m., a mass, what they're calling a die-in, which is a sort of a simulated extinction event on Parliament Square itself, inviting people to turn up dressed in, costumes representing, nature and species. Sunday is principally focused on outreach, given that the marathon will be running by and there'll be lots of passers-by in the vicinity of Parliament Square on Sunday. And then Monday is back to picketing the departments. And as Bill says, you're welcome to join for as much or as little of that as you would like. the whole intention is it's been very, very carefully liaised with the police so that it's a safe event, it's non-arrestable. Imagine more of a festival feeling, if you wish. And we are publishing guidelines to people on, you know, sorts of things like things to bring, to keep yourselves safe and so on. I do actually have a small information pack that I presented to Salisbury Green Drinks on this last week. And I'll be doing a similar presentation to our own local XR group in Salisbury tomorrow evening. And I'll be very happy to share all of that content with you if that's helpful.
Yeah, I certainly would, Graham. That isn't online, is it?
I can put it online, Bill. I can make it available in a Google Drive and share the link with you, mate.
Okay, brilliant.
I'll do that via the WhatsApp group.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. We're done. Jeremy.
Sorry, just a quick question. So, Bill, how are you getting there?
Train.
Good man.
I mean, it's
there's a coach leaving from Bath, I know.
Yeah.
At 7 on Friday, 8 on Saturday. Book your seat now.
Yeah, so XR Salisbury is running a coach up on the day from Salisbury on the Friday only. And again, you know, if you want to, we've got a link out on our website on how to book a seat if you wanted a seat on that coach.
And there are spaces?
There are spaces at the moment, yes, Bill, yeah.
Is it stopping anywhere?
No, it's a direct trip from Salisbury to South Bank and then back in the evening that day.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Graham. Val. You're on mute.
You're muted, Val.
I think we should just tell everybody that we have tried between us very, very hard to find somebody to print flags. And really, nobody wants to print flags. Either that or they are an extortionate price. So I think we will not be having any flags this time round.
Unless you can help, Graham.
Yeah.
Sounds like
yeah, most XR groups are actually into banner making at the moment. I had 7.5 meters of banner strung out over my dining room table only last week. And there's more to come yet. We've got an arts evening organised for next week as well. So it's very much in self-help mode. I think up in London, there are for banner making that's associated directly with the pickets for sponsor organisations. There are 4-day convening days before the big one starts. And somewhere up in northeast London, whose exact location hasn't yet been revealed, there is going to be an art factory. So it is potentially possible to have some artwork done before the big one.
Okay, thanks, Graham. We'll talk to you more on that.
Sounds like that the art group, one of its things it might want to do is produce banners, flags, and so on. Maybe next time around we might at least get a vinyl decal made with the Wiltshire Climate Alliance logo, such as it will be next time round, and stick it on to the middle of a flag, and then people could use their painting skills to work around that. That's just a random idea, sorry. So,
Andrew, are you offering the group to do it now? Because we need some, really.
Well, the group isn't convened properly, so no, we're still recruiting artists. And I'm struggling to get my Young People's Climate Art project going up and running in Trowbridge. So that's a definite no. But it's clearly a role that the artists in the art group, do you remember we had a writers group? They did what they wanted to do, not necessarily what we needed them to do.
Yeah.
Jeremy, is that an old hand you've got up?
It's a new one, but Graham had his hand up as well. I don't know if.
Well, no, I was just going to mention, if you've got access to a screen projector and you've got a sheet and you've got a couple of hours spare, then just put your logo up against a sheet, draw around it, and colour in. Yeah. I say these things can take a while to do, but that's probably the simplest way of creating a flag quickly.
Thanks. Hazel, did you have a hand up a minute ago?
Yes, sorry. It's just that I won't be there, but I'm going away of all the times. But my niece is going up there, and she's to do with the choir on the Friday, it seems, a big occasion. And also being a member of the Quaker organisation, there's the climate choir as well, and that's on the Friday, it seems. So it seems to be an awful lot of singing going on the Friday, it seems. And with my niece being XR, there's obviously organisations being prepared to buy tickets, return coach tickets from Bath up to London, it seems. So, and I know that the Quaker Westminster group is open to any Quaker people that are requiring attention, etc., at their actual meeting house. So that's how I found out more.
Great.
Can I say the point I was going to make? Sorry.
Yeah, go on, Jeremy.
Yeah, so Bath XR had a great idea for a banner, which was to put Velcro strips on a banner, and then cut out letters, and put the other side of the Velcro obviously on the back of the letters, and then you can reuse the banner for whatever message you want. It's a brilliant idea.
Yes.
Well, okay.
Bath XR can probably advise us on that. Let's hope that we don't have to lobby candidates in the next election after all, because this demonstration sounds as if it's going to be so powerful that the Conservative government is going to completely change course. Next month's members meeting is likely to be looking at wind farms, EV charging infrastructure for your electric car, updating members on the steering group's communication strategy, and hopefully we can slip in updates from member groups who have been busy doing things all over the county. I want to finish up then. Sorry it's run on, but it hasn't run on as long as it might. And thanks everyone for coming. Joan, thanks for coming from Swindon, someone whose name I don't recognize. Nigel, welcome, and I'm afraid you've committed yourself to at least a few words of advice. Graham, thanks for all the hard work you're putting in on that rally, and everybody, thanks for coming to this meeting, and thanks for doing what you do. It's amazing. You are Wiltshire Climate Alliance. Oh, and Judy, we'll talk separately offline. Thank you.
Okay.